Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you won't see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you're listening to Jams and Tea.
Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast. Oh my god, we're back. Holy shit, I'm sure you missed us. And this week we are here going to make up for the fact that we missed last week by covering just a metric shitload of albums this week, and my fucking bangs falling in front of my face. We are going to be talking about not one, not two, not three, but four main albums on the main episode this week. We are going to be talking about the latest release from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, LW. Then we are going to be discussing the latest album by Arab Strap, Scottish rock band?
Slowcore, but like...
That's not a thing. You made that up.
It is a thing, but that's more, I guess, how they
up.
sounded in the early days. I guess kind of like indie rock.
I would say like maybe
rock.
even indie-tronica, potentially.
Yeah. Arab Strap's new album, As Days Get Dark. Is that what it is? As Days Grow Dark? Something like that. And then we are also going to be discussing the new album from avant metal group Ad Nauseum. We are going to be talking about the fucking tongue twister ass title of that record.
Imperative Imperceptible Impulse.
That's the boy. And then we are also going to be talking about the latest release from rock band Tiger's Jaw. We are going to be talking about...
I won't care how you remember me.
I won't care how you remember me. We're going to be talking about that.
Do you want to like pull up the titles of these albums in the future?
I have just had a double dose of caffeine, and all of these titles are fucking weird. Let me have this moment for a second.
Yes.
I have them in front of me. I refuse to read.
Well, all right then.
Exactly. And then we are going to be talking about Saoirse's, who is totally here right now. We're going to be talking about her record club review. We're going to be talking about the classic album, 50th anniversary release album, Tapestry by Carole King. We're going to be talking about that, so check that out after this episode airs. And yeah, that's what we've got for you today.
Yes. We will be answering the question, is LW an L or a W? Okay, now it's time we kick off as ever with our opening segment, what we've been listening to. Jake, what have you been listening to in the last 2 weeks? 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Lots of things here. Ironically, I've really not been listening to that much different stuff in the last 2 weeks. It's pretty much been the same shit, which makes this a lot easier. I have been listening most prominently to a sort of recommendation on behalf of Morgan, who actually recommended this to Zach, but by proxy I was just like, I need music to also write to. I've been listening to the soundtrack to the Hideo Kojima game Death Stranding by a one Mr. Ludwig Forssell, who, as far as I can tell, like doesn't have a whole lot of musical credits, which is like weird as fuck, because this is such a...
Didn't Churches do a song for this?
They did. Mm-hmm. They did. That is on the music from the game soundtrack, which is also similarly pretty great.
That song is awesome. That's one of my favorite Churches songs.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the best ones. I completely agree. But the soundtrack itself is fucking wild. Like there's like multiple times on the front half of that album soundtrack where I am like, this sounds like the fucking Burial compilation. This is dope. And then there's also just like, it also is very comparable to, I would say, Junkie XL's work on Mad Max Fury Road, just like this really like big, expensive sounding blockbuster action kind of stuff. But I really prefer the sort of like ambient electronic stuff that it leans into, especially like on that first half. It's just really, really solid shit. I love that. Great music to just sort of, lay back, listen to. But I will shout out, this is a this completely snuck up on me at the recommendation of podcast friend April. I listened to, as well as Tyler, I believe, listened to the new record from an artist by the name of Genesis Owusu. The new album, Smiling with No Teeth, which is a frontrunner for my album of the year right now, because that album rules. I am in love with that record. It's like a little bit all over the place, but it's sort of like a feature not a bug kind of situation where it's just like, hey, do you want to listen to this dude cover every possible facet of his own sound and do it really well? Like if you enjoy like soul, neo soul, or hip hop in any capacity, I can't imagine you thinking that this is anything less than excellent.
I think we're definitely going to cover it next week. I think, even if it's
really okay,
even if it's optional, I think we should still like make a point of, because I would like to talk about it anyway.
There's a lot that can be said, so I will leave it at that. I highly recommend it just because it's an album that I don't see getting a whole lot of attention, but it's just like it's just so much damn fun. Go listen to it. Give Mr. Owusu a listen. I also
this?
I also listened to an old classic that I had. It's just a record that I don't go back to maybe as often as I should, save for a couple of singles, but that would be Mr. Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City, which, I mean, peerless 2010s hip hop release. I mean, and by peerless, I mean it's basically rivaled by only his other work. But I mean, yeah, it's Good Kid, Mad City. Shit slaps from front to back. I will say it is a record that I do love it with every inch of my being, but it is also an album that I definitely respect more than I actually like. I've always been more into the neo soul sound, psychedelic sound of To Pimp a Butterfly. That just I gravitate more towards that, but it's every bit as good of a record. Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst, one of his best songs, one of the best hip hop songs of all time, if you ask me. But yeah, I mean, it's Good Kid, Mad City. It's fucking rules.
I have vivid childhood or teenage memories of like, that would be like what your friend would play on his like phone speaker or his like little portable speaker at school in the break time. You'd be listening to fucking Poetic Justice or something and just vibing.
Poetic Justice.
And yeah, fucking that album will always have an attachment to like
the opening of Backseat Freestyle is just like on my head, like in my head rent free for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and there's like opening kind of samples, drums, and Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe. That just immediately transports me to high school. So
also Shireen, the opening track, deeply underappreciated song in his catalog. Nobody talks about that song, and I'm just like, y'all on crack. No, bad, no disrespect. I gave a listen to another classic as well. I listened to Rush's Moving Pictures. Just because that is another album that's just like, you know, this big important thing, and I love it, and I just never listened to it for whatever reason. And yeah, I mean, it fucking rules. That album. It's not like most of Rush's like classic stuff. They aren't really like long records, but that is an album that like you blink and it's fucking over. But it's like, it's still just raucously fun. Like I don't know, man. Even if progressive rock is just not your jam, I have a hard time accepting that you can't have at least a little bit of fun with a record like that. It's so lean and concise, but also it's just everything about that band that makes it great. And it's like not even one of the band's 4 favorite records from me. So it's like, you know, what the fuck ever, but it's great. It's a great album. Everybody should listen to it. And I guess last on my list here, I will mention an album that will make Tyler happy. I probably I don't know if I mentioned this when I first listened to it, but I've been listening to the title track over and over and over again and decided to give a go with the whole album. But I listened to Near My God again, just because I think the title track on Near My God is like the greatest song ever. The whole album is fantastic, and it just keeps growing on me. But that title track is like, if I were to make like a 50 favorite songs of all time list right now, that would place quite highly on it. But yeah, that album's fucking great.
That song has the most 2010s emo lyric I've ever heard, which is ashing cigarettes on gravestones and unfollowing my dead friends.
Yep. It also, I also just want to point out that album is like this deeply like emotional like thing, and it also has a song called like Trapped in Dillards. Like, okay.
That is a deeply emotional thing to go through.
I mean, look, if you listen to the song, yes, you're right. But yeah, that's what I've been listening to this week.
Yeah, God.
All right. I'll get into it then. First thing I listened to was the classic KMFDM record, Naive, the first record in their big, really successful 90s run. The one I had listened to before this was, what the hell is it? Angst. And this one is a lot darker, a lot heavier than Angst is. It certainly speaks to their sound being a lot more industrial than electro. So I could see if you're really into like heavier stuff and not so much dance stuff, this would be a great starting point for the band for you. But if you're more into the electronic dancey stuff, I mean, either Angst or Nihil would be the best place to go, but that's that. It's good. I like it a lot. Next thing I listened to, classic slowcore indie rock something or other record, Duster's Stratosphere. This is a very well-regarded record. I'd listened to it once a while back. I gave it a couple re-listens, and I'm not a fan. I think it's...
Yes! I've always thought that record was overrated. It's so vindicated.
Yeah, it's overrated as hell. And no, I mean, it's not like bad, but
it's good. Like, it's a 6. I give it a 6 out of 10. I think it's a decent record.
Yeah,
but like, Jesus, the level of acclaim that band gets.
The acclaim they get, I find completely unwarranted. But yeah. Next thing from last year, actually, a compilation record of Ennio Morricone's darker psychedelic material called Morricone Segreto. This has about like 7 unreleased tracks from his back catalog, along with 20 songs from his available catalog. It's a lot of his dark psychedelic material. It's very bass heavy, very like synthesizer heavy, very in contrast to a lot of your typical vision of what he does. It's a very cohesive sounding compilation record, if a bit too long at 27 tracks, but I think it's worth your time checking out if you're into that Morricone stuff and want something a bit off the beaten path.
Highly recommend his work with the film For a Few Dollars More, which is his best soundtrack. IMO. He has a piece that's like during a dream sequence in that film that I think is one of the most genius pieces of music ever recorded. So check that out. It is deeply underrated.
I would give the edge to Once Upon a Time in the West, but thinking about it, I really can't disagree with you, because the Dollar Trilogy in general is just like super. Those scores are like, people are like, yeah, it's Ennio Morricone, it's a classic, but it's quite easy to overlook just how fucking amazing it sounds for its time.
Good, Bad, and the Ugly is iconic, but the score of like just like the first duel in For a Few Dollars More is like, that's one of my favorite movie scenes fucking ever, and it's mostly because of the score.
Yeah, it's also worth saying, of course, that like the work Ennio Morricone did in the 70s and 80s in horror is like, I would say the only other person doing the similar work that was up to that level was like John Carpenter.
Yeah, because he did The Thing, which was a John Carpenter score.
Yeah, right. But at the same time, like, he did the Animals trilogy for Dario Argento, I think. He did some Lucio Fulci movies. Like his score for A Lizard and a Woman's Skin's really weird and interesting. So it's basically like 3 different themes and motifs that he combines and layers over each other in different combinations to create different like levels of dissonance depending on what's happening. And it's just super weird and interesting. Yeah.
Well, there we go. We've got our obligatory Fulci reference from Saoirse. We're only 10 minutes in.
Cool guy, Morricone. All right, so continuing on, Cloud Nothing's Attack on Memory. This was a record Tyler recommended to me a long time ago, and I didn't get around till now, and I think it's pretty great. It's like this post-hardcore tinged pop-punk record. It's like really consistently just amazing in terms of the performances, the versatility of the lead guy's voice, Dylan
Baldy.
something or other. But it's just a really fun, short punch in the gut of a record. A lot of themes of worthlessness, feeling lost in life, having no purpose. It's procrastination. It's pretty good, pretty fun. I'd recommend it.
Yeah.
Last thing, continuing, I guess, on my progression through the career of one Francis Vincent Zappa, Chunga's Revenge, his 1970 solo album, and notably the first record of his to feature Flo and Eddie in a very controversial era of his career. And I thought it was pretty good. This is like a jazz album, essentially, mostly composed of leftovers from Hot Rats. And as a result, if you like Hot Rats, I think you're really at least going to enjoy about half of this, because it's got a bunch of really good jazz songs and a couple decent kind of more comedy rock, as he would be known for in the 70s and 80s. But I think it's worth your time. It's a fun record. It's not as substantial, I think, as what he did later, but it's still good, and that's what I've been listening to.
Yeah. Been listening to some new stuff the past 2 weeks, namely records by a little known progressive band called Dream Theater.
Who they?
I don't know them. What did I
What's a
start
Portnoy?
with?
What is a progressive band?
It's when they have lots of diverse people in the band.
I wish I hadn't asked. It was a bad joke. Please talk more.
I started with Systematic Chaos, which was the next record that I had in the lineup of going through their stuff in order. Excellent record. Sort of builds on train of thought in really interesting ways. Very much two sides of the same coin, those records, although I must say I do definitely prefer Train of Thought. And after that, I gave a listen to Black Clouds and Silver Linings, which just frankly kind of blew me away considering the reception it has, which is, good, but not, it did not match up to how much I ended up loving the album. Just under 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence and Metropolis Part 2 in my ranking, it ended up. Yeah, very good. Worth hearing, just to hear the Count of Tuscany, if nothing else, which is like probably their best song. It's like 20 minutes, and I'm surprised it's not in my on repeat Spotify playlist that they make for you. Yeah, real good. Another new listen I did was the Horrors album called V. The Horrors are like a sort of, I don't know. The horrors are in the form that they take on V, are a sort of shoegaze inspired new wave act.
They're kind of like they're kind of goth influenced as well, like
Yeah,
especially on the earlier stuff. But also I think you can hear a bit of it on V as well. Kind of like The Cure meets Susie and the Banshees or something like that.
I'm looking at a picture of the band right now, and
they're exactly
these
like
are
you
goth.
picture 'em.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucking phenomenal album. Much like Black Clouds and Silver Linings, worth hearing for the closing track alone. Something to Remember Me By, which is like quickly shooting its way into one of my favorite songs of all time.
That was my song of the year in 2017, I think.
Yeah, that would, if my favorite song of all time did not come out in 2017, then yeah. Yeah, it's just really, really good stuff. It sort of does feel like just another 80s pastiche band or album in some ways, but it's certainly more idiosyncratic than that, and sort of it definitely has more of a voice than like the 1975, for instance.
If I were to recommend another album from them, I would say listen to Primary Colors, which is I think probably I would say a better album overall, even though I love V. And that album has really got like heavy on the really dark gothic shoegaze stuff, but it's also got the same kind of pop sound at the core of it.
Yeah, I'll be looking into that then.
Yeah.
Another thing that I listened to, this is a re-listen, record that I haven't heard in years now. I re-listened to the Gaslight Anthem's Handwritten, which has been my favorite of theirs for a long time. And I was worried, like, is this gonna hold up in the same way that it did when I was 16 years old? And oh, fucking shocker, it totally did. Because it's just a perfect record. It's the Gaslight Anthem, just like at the zenith of their talents, songwriting wise, sound wise, like just everything. Not as highly regarded as 59 Sound for some fucking reason.
Yeah, I'm just looking on their Rate Your Music, and it's the second lowest rated album, Handwritten.
It is literally as good. Like
that's just patently stupid.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, it's perfect. 10.
So because we've had a 2-week break, there's a lot that I could talk about. So I'm gonna start by saying that I just listened to a lot of David Bowie this fortnight, I suppose. I listened to Earthling for the first time. Fucking astounding, interesting record. It's like
7 years in Tibet, just not the fucking wildest shit you've ever heard in your
right.
life.
I didn't know he could be like heavy and sound kind of like Britpop at the same time. It's weird. I like it very much. But my new favorite Bowie record is Low, which was the first listen for me.
Hot take. No, I'm just joking. Great album.
Yeah, no, but previously my favorite was Spiders from Mars. So this is a really great discovery. The reason I checked it out is that I heard that the ambient side B to it, a lot of those keys were initially conceived to be soundtrack for The Man Who Fell to Earth, but it didn't end up working out that way. And it led me on to listen to the record. And it's just super interesting. You can hear that happening in it.
Ryan Eno.
Saoirse, have you heard the Heroes album in full?
Not in full.
Because that has the exact same, or almost the exact same structure as Low, with the ambient songs on the second side. And
Berlin Trilogy.
Well, that's funny because the third album, the Berlin Trilogy, is nothing like the other two. So
yeah, weird.
Yeah,
but anyway, my hot take for the day is that Heroes, the album, is better than Low, but not by much.
My take is that I like Outside more than both.
That's just fucking. You're weird.
I did actually listen to a Brian Eno record, that being Taking Tiger Mountain, open bracket, by Strategy, close bracket, and a fucking rule. It's just a really great time. Other classics I got to for the first time, In the Court of the Crimson King, which it's In the Court of the Crimson King. What do you want from me?
If you give it less than a 10, log off.
Well, you're in luck because I did that.
Off.
I gave it a 10.
Oh, good. Okay. I thought you were saying you gave it less than a 10. I'm like,
No.
I bet we're going to have some
stinky.
Hitchcock antis in our replies saying that Moonchild sucks.
I was just about to say that.
And you're wrong. It's fine. It's okay to be wrong.
You know what? You should be...
Bad opinion. Bad.
You should be.
Everyone's like, it's a masterpiece except for that. And I'm just like, shut up.
What a stupid thing to say.
You know, the only really essential song on that album is the first one.
I had to hold in myself from shitting out my own spine.
Yeah, I've genuinely heard
here
that
is really
take,
great,
though,
but you know, have a cigar, just bad.
16-year-old kid who DMs his crush on Messenger and sends her 21st century schizoid man and says, you should listen to this. Kanye West sampled it on his album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
2010.
Anyway. Yeah.
Do you have a point to make with that, or are you just
no? I was just
tormenting me?
trying to paint an image of a very specific person that we all know exists.
You did. You definitely did.
I can name them. I choose not to, but I could name them on this podcast.
Anyway, Saoirse.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Uncontroversial take. I listened to Slowdive's self-titled record. It just slipped right in there into the spot of my favorite Slowdive record.
An increasingly popular take, it seems.
It just
unless you're Anthony Fantano.
Boo!
I think gave it like a 3,
4, 3, something like that.
Well, he said it was just a lot of like tired repetitions of old ideas, which is dumb.
Anthony Fantano be like, I've heard this before. 0 out of 10.
Anyway, the Bedlam and Goliath, last record I want to talk about. Listen to that. It just completely blew my mind. I loved it so much. The funny thing was that immediately after that, I re-listened to the Mars Volta podcast, completely forgetting before I started that there's an extended bit in that about how I wouldn't like the Mars Volta.
It's always
that recently too.
It's always nice to be proved wrong.
Doesn't have Frank Turner on it.
Oh, that's right. That's the fucking bit.
Well, actually,
did I say that?
Yes, you did. I'm distinctly hearing it in your voice.
Right.
Oh, it doesn't have Frank Turner on it. Like that's the exact intonation.
Well, actually,
that's even funnier now that I'm wrong.
Funny enough that Saoirse should shout out Mars Volta, because I did a Mars Volta re-listen myself about a week and a half ago. I threw on Francis the Mute for the first time in full for a long while, and my God, I don't have anything new to add that I didn't say in that video, but it's just a fucking perfect album. It's
Elvia Kez.
Yeah, I might have to be basic and put it above Bedlam in my ranking, despite the fact that I made a big deal about how Bedlam was my favorite Mars Volta record. I might just have to be basic.
Just stop being weird is the thing. There's a fine line between not being basic and being a weirdo. You're being a weirdo.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm redacting that because
I'm weird.
I'm putting Francis the Mute back on the top.
Hell yeah, let's go.
Yes. Was that Riverdale, Jake, that you were just doing? Is that it?
No, is Riverdale what you're doing?
Jake did a bit.
I did. I
Anyway,
refuse to
No.
acknowledge it.
Tyler.
in terms of new releases, not new releases, but like first listens, this week I listened to the first Dire Straits album. Because
Fire.
I know that in terms of sound, Dire Straits and Steely Dan are cut from a very similar cloth in terms of very polished and pristine soft rock sort of sounds. And I have to
I would have
say,
never made that connection, but yeah, you're right. That's
and I have to
interesting.
say that I did find the first Dire Straits album to be a little underwhelming to a certain extent. But I think it's just that it's such a slow-paced and measured record that I need to spend a little bit more time with it. Much the same as some of the sort of later Steely Dan records, which are less kind of immediate but more rewarding. That said, obviously, Sultans of Swing is an amazing song. And Mark Knopfler is one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived.
The GOAT.
Yeah, and of course, it's no surprise that Mark Knopfler ended up playing guitar on Steely Dan's Gaucho, because that is just a collision of worlds that was waiting to happen. But yeah, a really good album. I'm going to listen to some more of their records. They have another record that's I can't remember the name of it, but like not the one that was the big successful one, but the one that came before that. Anyway, I'm looking forward to getting to it. I also listened to, so I won't really go into this, but I spent some time revisiting the full discography of Arab Strap, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we review the album very soon. But suffice it to say, they are a band that have worked with a really kind of straightforward, limited template, but have always done interesting things with it. So yeah, obviously a great band. I listened to, doing those albums prompted me to listen to the Bell and Sebastian album, The Boy with the Arab Strap, which was named after the band, although funnily enough, Stuart Murdoch, the frontman of Bell and Sebastian, named his album The Boy with the Arab Strap as a tribute to the band without asking them, and they didn't like that. They were really pissed that they named an album after them without asking. And so Arab Strap then released an album called Monday at the Huggin' Pint, which has a cover that is like a direct parody of one of Bell and Sebastian's album covers, which is a fun bit of back and forth between these two completely different bands that sound nothing like each other. But anyway, Bell and Sebastian are amazing.
It's extraordinarily childish, and I kind of respect it.
Bell and Sebastian, well, they're both Scottish bands, so that's one thing, I guess. But Bell and Sebastian, in their late 90s stuff, records like Tiger Milk and If You're Feeling Sinister are just straight up some of the best singer-songwriter records of all time. Right up there with 70s and 60s singer-songwriter classics. Boy with the
Which
Arab
we
Strap,
may be covering
yes,
sooner or later.
Yes, but Boy with the Arab Strap is a really solid record, not as good as those first two, but still really, really great. I also have started to get into a new discography following our Death episode, which if you haven't checked out, that was the last thing we released before a couple of weeks ago. So go and watch it if you haven't. It's a really good episode. But I wanted to get into some more death metal, and specifically some of those some gnarly, more difficult death metal. So I decided to get into Gorguts, and actually the reason I decided to get into Gorguts specifically is that the band Ad Nauseum, who we're also reviewing today, cited them as a major influence on their record. And Gorguts have a pretty small discography, I think only 6 albums over 30 years. So I thought, fuck it, I'm going to get into these records. And so I listened to their first 2 records, Considered Dead, which is very much their scream bloody gore, really solid record, although I'd say that it's only kind of scream bloody gore in terms of thematic similarities. Musically, it's just completely still kind of death metal, but so atonal and ugly sounding and raw and just disgusting.
More in the morbid angel sect of death metal, where it's vaguely industrial.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, fuck, this is... But it also has those really kind of wailing guitar solos that you get in death metal as well. Mm-hmm. So it still firmly roots you in that world. And so then I went onto their second record, The Erosion of Sanity, which absolutely melted my fucking face off. It was an instant 10 out of 10 record, absolutely flawless. It was just disturbing how amazing it was for a second record so quickly off the heels of Considered Dead. And it's just absolutely outstanding and essential. And I'm very much looking forward to getting to their third album, Obscura, which is one of the most highly regarded death metal albums of all time. So I'm sure that I'm going to have a great time with that. I also want to shout out one more thing I'll shout out that I listened to is that I listened to cue the signs. I listened to the first solo album of Steely Dan frontman Donald Fagen called The Nightfly.
I need a folk punk version.
I think you just.
Tyler.
Yeah,
I think
he's got the pad. Don't worry,
Okay, cool.
I'm really at this point. I'm really running low on Steely Dan new releases. Related releases I haven't heard, but I listened to Donald Fagen's first solo record, The Nightfly, which was really, really good, really solid, very different tone to the Steely Dan records, because the Steely Dan records are full of lots of kind of like dark humor and witty satire and stuff, whereas The Nightfly is this very earnest and straightforward record about like Fagen's childhood in the 50s and sort of growing up in this era of like radio pre like the explosion of rock and roll, and it's like almost like has like David Lynch vibes, but not like weird David Lynch, like
a straight story,
Twin Peaksy vibe. Yeah, straight story vibes. But yeah, anyway, it's a really delightful little record that I recommend if you enjoy any Steely Dan, and I'll leave it there.
Fagen's childhood, my favorite Tarkovsky picture.
Yes. So
I'm surprised that was what broke the dam.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just sometimes it's just the right amount of stupid, and that was it.
It's why I held on to it. I thought about it when he was talking. I was like, should I say this?
Yeah, I'm glad you went for the fences on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think what made it so funny is that it just wasn't funny.
Yeah,
not at all. Yeah,
not remotely.
All right, so I guess our first review today on the chopping block is I feel it's only appropriate that I should be the one to give context to this band and probably even just do my review, since I have a lot to say about it. But anyway, I think it's meaningful that we end up reviewing the new and the most vital in decades albums from both Mogwai and Arab Strap within the space of a month. As these are bands that are deeply connected and they're cut from very similar cloths. In fact, it goes back to Arab Strap's singer, Aidan Moffat, is the vocalist on Are You Still Into It, one of the somber highlights of Mogwai's first album, Young Team. It's also apparently a total coincidence that both bands' new albums have titles beginning with as that have entirely opposite emotional tones. We talked about the gentle optimism of As the Love Continues versus the ominous doom of As Days Get Dark. The cliche that people often use to describe the core sound of Arab Strap is disco slint, which is both funny and not entirely inaccurate. But I think it's more pointed and maybe more obvious to say that Arab Strap have always just been disco Mogwai, or even disco low if you want to go back to their slowcore roots, stripping away the crunching climaxes for steady, throbbing, slow tempo ballads that are consistently more musically interesting than Mogwai's ballads, which are usually sort of vocalist piano sketches. But if Mogwai are the more important band, I would argue Arab Strap are the more captivating and musically diverse band over the years, despite their albums being so sparse and minimal. They never pushed their sound beyond its limits, but they continued to evolve. And by the time of their last record, The Last Romance, when they realized that what they were doing was going stale, they immediately called it quits and adamantly refused to come back unless they had something to say. And I would argue with As Days Get Dark, they absolutely do. They come out of the gates swinging. I think the first taster of this album was opening track, The Turning of Our Bones, which I think stands as one of the band's best songs to date. It opens with a declarative statement of purpose and an iconic Arab Strap lyric. I don't give a fuck about the past or our glory days gone by. All I care about right now is that wee mole between your thighs. And this line's so good because it immediately immerses you in the core thematic interests of the band, sex and self-loathing. These are
a few of my favorite things.
Love Deftones.
Yeah. These are two central concepts that are at the core of every single Arab Strap album. And here they are paired with the band's most recognizable sonic signifiers too. You get a gently rolling guitar line and a really garishly synthetic drum machine beat. It calls back to the glory days of their greatest record, in my opinion, 1999's Elephant Shoe, and combined with the more fleshed out instrumentals of the also great 2003 album Monday at the Hug and Pint. The thing that makes As Days Get Dark really stand out, though, is how polished and thrilling the production is on this record. Those synthetic beats feel really stark and aggressive and hammering. The strings that hang across a number of the tracks feel genuinely cinematic and eerie, emotional and thrilling. Aidan's voice is front and center more than it ever has been before. And despite his distinct and thick Scottish brogue, he's more audible and coherent than I think he's ever been on record. His strangely direct and his almost ugly poetic style has not lost any of the genuine edge, menace, and loneliness that it's always had. And he has this great style where he's just as often singing as he is sort of doing this kind of fast-paced spoken word thing, which I think is one of the things that really makes the band feel so unique. Another Clockwork Day is a great song. It's ostensibly about sitting in your own filth and masturbating to nostalgic memories of past lovers, but Aidan renders it beautiful and sad through his affecting style and delivery. The way that he's able to write so gently about these topics. I didn't realize that the song had such a pathetic subject at its core until I really dug into the lyrics. He's so great at almost deceiving you with the prettiness of the writing and the sound. The desperate, conflicted tragedy of clinging to the meaningless connections of social media interactions for the sake of trying to abet your own self-loathing is just nailed in the song Bluebird, which is an absolutely devastatingly pretty song with the hook. I don't want your love. I need your love. Give me your love. Don't love me. Very Twilight sad hook. But I love this song. Catch me openly weeping to this last night after 5 listens previously where I had just been stone-faced. This shit just completely undoes you if you catch it at the right time. And that's the Scottish sad boy power. Kebabylon, in the words of Stereogum, is an ode to the drunken zombie march when the last place closes down and everyone's roaming the streets, hitting up kebab shops and convenience stores, and also a story about the people who have to come and clean up the mess left behind by all of that. The band sort of nail this lifeless, plodding trudge. And once again, Aidan brings some of his most pointed lyricism. And you're already dreaming as I claw up your condom, as your syringe cracks underneath my boot. You've crashed on the couch, passed out on the porch. Such a lover, such a liar, such a brute. I love the imagery that Aidan is able to capture. It's really always this very vivid and confronting, but also kind of has this kind of weirdly tragic beauty to it. And I think the greatest triumph of Arab Strap and Aiden as a writer and vocalist is the way that he's able to give you these scenarios and characters that are unforgiving, pathetic, but unabashedly realistic, and ugly in a way that's poeticized, but never romanticized. And that's something that I think a lot of writers who try to be like incredibly sad and write about incredibly pathetic characters sometimes aren't able to get. They just end up doing something that makes it sound romantic or just purely beautiful. Whereas Aiden gets how emotionally complicated all of this is. I think if the record has a weak point, it might be the plodding shuffle of Tears on Tour's shimmering synth instrumental. But even this sees Aiden crafting the indelible autobiographical image of him sort of weeping silently to Pixar movies on his couch next to his kids. Though centrally the song is actually about becoming so numb that you're no longer able to cry, and the kind of tragic suffering that this in itself can bring. So basically the weakest song on the album is still lyrically brilliant. But I think where this record really elevates and becomes one of their best albums is in the final 5-song stretch, the second half of this record. From Here Comes Comus onwards is just fucking masterful. Comus is this great song about trying to justify your horrific and harmful drunken behavior by projecting your responsibility for it onto this demonic sort of alcoholic god figure who is whose bidding you're just doing when you're drinking. It's a very dark but interesting song. Fable of the Urban Fox is pretty bluntly a metaphor for Britain's treatment of immigrants and the systemic racism baked into UK culture. But Aiden's venomous directness is, I think, exactly what the song needs. And as a result, it feels vital, angry and gutting. It also works because the story of the urban fox is not just purely metaphor. The spread of foxes into urban areas and their treatment as vermin is both an analog to immigration and also a topic ripe for analysis in and of itself. And actually, the song reminds me of Everything's Tin the Manhole off of Man Alive, because that's a song that examines the exact same subject. This idea of isolation and distancing through the story of urban foxes in Britain. Then you get a complete left turn on this album with the song I Was Once a Weak Man, which has a fucking trap beat, which I think is like, it's jarring, but then again, you think about it, and I think about how like Arab Strap have always had these like really clubby dance beats under their sad guitar songs, and it kind of just makes sense that they would kind of evolve to the point where they're just doing these kind of like trap influenced sounds, but it sounds fucking great. There are lyrical references to John Travolta and Mick Jagger. In fact, the working title of the song was Mick Shagger, which would have been a great Mogwai song title.
Vastly better song title.
Yes, I agree. But I love this track. It's not like one of the most lyrically standout moments on the record, but I just love the fact that they're able to do this stupidly strange bit of trap influence and make it sound like a logical extension of their sound. And then, as if this record couldn't get even better, it ends with two of its best songs. I particularly want to shout out Sleeper, which is my favorite song on the album. I think I would put it in the top 3 songs that this band have ever released. The double-tracked vocals during the chorus reminded me of Nick Cave's Ghosteen. It is a song about mortality, trudging through night after night and noticing yourself aging through years of the same tragic, drunken routine. But the band make it feel poignant, unsettling, even menacing at points. Where I really think it becomes a definitive Arab Strap song, and one of the best ones, is the way that it feels in some ways like a kind of meta commentary on the band's own career and arc. Because this song is about them singing about the same themes they were singing about 25 years ago. but it's different because now they're 25 years older and doing the same thing in their lives, this trudge through night after night, and age has left them haggard and sick and broken by the numb endlessness of it all. And it's just it's a beautiful bit of emotional development from their early stuff, and it calls back to the very beginning. The very first single this band ever released was a song called "The First Big Weekend," which became an iconic Scottish song and the template for the band. And in many ways, Sleeper feels like the last big weekend. It is a summary, a reflection, but also just one of the most vital songs that they've ever released. And I was certainly hoping to come into this Arab Strap album enjoying it, but I was not expecting to be so thoroughly impressed by it. And for it to be like their second best album, I mean, if not their best, it's really close between this one and Elephant Shoe. But yeah, it's an absolutely awesome album. I've listened to it over and over the last couple of weeks, and I am just, yeah, I'm glad it exists, and I'm even gladder that we get to talk about it, even if just for a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, who else wants to share how they experienced this Arab Strap album?
I reckon I go.
Sweet.
I didn't know what the hell an Arab Strap is.
Oh, fun fact, before you chime in.
yeah.
An Arab Strap is actually a real thing. It is a sex toy for pegging, I think.
It's a cock ring.
Literally.
Sorry,
less
yes.
chat, more strap.
It's a cock ring. Sorry, yes, you're right. It's a cock ring. I misremembered.
Fascinating. Not surprising at all.
No.
Yeah. This is really, really damn good record. I hope they make more like it. Most of the things that Tyler's gone into, I pretty much agree with. So I won't belabor much of those points. I think Turning of Our Bones is one of the best songs of the year. Same for Sleeper. The only sort of hesitations I have, or I can't quite get on board with, I Was Once a Weak Man. Is that what that song's called?
Yeah,
Something like that.
Yeah. I hear a trap beat and it's like a reflex. Like, okay, no. And like it's a fine song. I wouldn't say I dislike it, but it also comes at a point in the album where it, like, you've kind of been with it for quite a while, and I kind of feel like the album should be a bit shorter than it is anyway. So, but otherwise, just really, really good stuff. Really immaculate, fascinating songwriting. Excellent stuff.
dope.
Well, I don't really have a whole lot to say. Well, I mean, especially after Tyler unpacked it as well as he did. If I can be, I guess, a little bit more critical, I'll be brief just because we got a lot to get to today, so I don't want to repeat anything. But I do think the album's very good. I enjoy it a good deal, and I'm kind of hoping that I just sort of like, because the more I listened to it, the more I liked it. Like, first listen, I was just like, yeah, this is good. Second listen kind of grew on me, and I'm just kind of hoping that trend maybe continues, because I could see myself in some universe like really falling head over heels for it. But also it brings me to the inevitable like comparison that I'm surprised hasn't really been touched on yet, in that like sound-wise, well, not even sound-wise, but just like the approach to a lot of the things here really remind me of the last Twilight Sad album. And inevitably, when I'm listening to it, I'm just kind of like, I think that the production on that album just synthesizes those things a lot more naturally and purposefully. And here it's like sometimes it's really, really good and totally on the level of that, and sometimes it clashes a little bit. Sometimes the stiffness of some of the drum beats and like the aforementioned sort of like drum beat, trap beat on that one song is just like, it just feels a little bit unnatural, and it clashes with it in a way that I don't particularly care for. I can see why it would work for some, but not really for me. I just kind of tend to like it when the melding of sounds is a bit less jarring on something very specifically like this. I got used to the vocals pretty quickly. I mean, I think that maybe my only issue there is that like they are very forward in the mix. One of the reasons why, again, kind of a reductive comparison to just keep going back to it, but one of the reasons I love the lead vocalist of the Twilight Sad is that he kind of finds a really nice balance between his voice and the instrumental, whereas here this is a bit overpowering, and it's like when the production is like, it's not hit and miss per se, but it's like when that's sort of the forefront in the mix, everything that suffers a little bit more, and it ends up being a bit musically nondescript, specifically on songs like Babylon, which I'm not super into. I Was Once a Weak Man also kind of has this problem. That said, I think that songs like, I actually really like Tears on Tour. I think the first 3 tracks are pretty goddamn stellar. Another Clockwork Day, fantastic song, really like that one. And Fable of the Urban Fox was sort of the like unlocked for me, like a comparison of like lyrically, this is very singular and very much of its own style, but it just reminded me of the writing of Everything, specifically on Man Alive, where it's just like, you know, the kind of esoteric metaphors that are like, it has a very distinct translation, but it's going about it in the weird, almost like most avant way possible. But there's such a dark, morose, atmospheric tangibility to this album that makes me like really, really want to dive into it and listen with it more. And like, really, if anything, this album makes me want to listen to their other stuff, because I'm convinced that if they make an album like this that I'm still not like fully in love with or anything, there will be an album in their discography that will be for me.
I think you'll really like Monday at the Huggin' Pint. That's got some like real Twilight Sad vibes on it.
That I will go for.
One thing I want to say that I just thought of on the note of Fable of the Urban Fox is that this song is what Idols thought they were doing on Ultra Mono.
Yeah, you made some points.
Because it's like very bold and direct in the commentary that it's about, but like it's just, it feels more natural, organic. It feels more earned. And because it's a theme that the rest of the record doesn't really dwell on too much, it feels like it has a place and isn't, too obnoxious.
No.
And also just, I love the way that Aidan Moffat's voice sounds when he says lines like, "These streets are fucking full."
Yeah, that accent really adds a lot to it, in my opinion. There's like a harshness and a bluntness that kind of accentuates. It gives it a little bit of an edge that I really like. And like, I obviously, it's like I sound a bit more down on this than I actually am. It's just that, like, you know, Tyler did a very good job of explaining the things that make this very, very good. But I will represent the part of me that's just like, this is definitely not for everybody. Not even totally sure if it's fully for me. But that said, it's still an album that just like, there's enough density to everything happening here. Like lyrically, storytelling wise, and instrumentally, it's too interesting to discount IMO. So yeah, I think it's very, very good, and it makes me want to listen to their other stuff in the hopes that I find the Arab Strap project, and I'm like, yes, this is it.
Yeah,
me.
The accent for the Fox song, Fable of the Urban Fox, it helps a lot because it's a great accent for storytelling because it's such a gravelly accent. It's so evocative in the same way as other Scottish sad boy bands I like, but also because I have heard those words said with that exact accent by various drunk Scottish people in my life.
Yeah. And I think that's
I can't imagine that was terribly pleasant.
I think that's maybe where
like,
some of
sorry. Dude sounds like reading from Rorschach's journal sometimes. The streets are extended gutters and the gutters are full of blood.
That was really on point.
Okay.
That was more Brendan Gleeson, I think.
Yeah, I just, you know.
But yeah, I think maybe, Saoirse, something like what you're alluding to is maybe part of the reason of the success of this band, because you do like, that is the whole thing. It's like, it's not really so much singing songs as it's like the spoken word storytelling.
Yeah, and it like evokes a person and a lifestyle where it's like, I have crossed paths with the various horrible people described in these songs, and it feels like a first person in like Rorschach's journal, like you are being led through this person's internal landscape. I think Fable of the Urban Fox is a real highlight. You mentioned Sleeper as well, which is another song I just adore on this album. I think the way the instrumentals are constructed and the instrumental landscapes they construct are all really interesting. The way they cross repetitive acoustic guitar riffs with synths, with electronic drum beats. It creates this really compelling landscape to live in for sort of 45 minutes, especially with the dark and brooding, or sometimes monotonous storytelling. It creates a vibe. If I have one criticism of the record, it is that it's very consistently that vibe, and sometimes I want a bit more diversity. I'm just kind of like, okay, we're doing this, good. I like this. I like that we're doing this. Oh, we're still doing it. That's great. But that doesn't mean that each song independently isn't a great nugget of storytelling. I enjoyed this record very much. I suspect I'll like other Arab Strap records more, but it's an incredibly interesting, exciting record. I don't think it's helped that it's coming off the back of another sort of spoken word rock project that I loved very much. And I feel like in my mind, if there was more distance, I might appreciate it more. That's not the record's fault. But yeah, I still liked it very much.
Again, I would say the one for you is probably Monday at the Hug and Pine. That has lots of shoegazy guitars in it and stuff. Yeah, I would say one comment I would add is that I think one of the most interesting things about Arab Strap is the fact that their instrumentals are built around sounds that clash and shouldn't really work together and feel like, you know, like the dance beat underneath the acoustic guitar, like the really throbbing sounds against the clash of the really like garishly synthetic with the beautifully crisp organic instrumentation. Is this really interesting aesthetic thing that they do, and it shouldn't work as well as it does, but it really does for me. And I think this is kind of because this record sounds so good, like it's hot take. I think this is my pick for the best produced album of the year so far, in my opinion anyway. But because it sounds so good, it I think makes that clash and makes that particular style more accessible to new audiences than it ever has been before, which I suspect might have fed into some of what August may think of this record, because I have already spoken to him about it. But I'm curious to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, when this was first added to the docket, I was like, okay, Scottish sad bastard band, I'm gonna fucking hate this. And lo and behold, I adored this. I think this is a fantastic record. I love how I think Tyler made a great point and about the influence of the band Slint on here, which they have admitted to in interviews, and I thought that was definitely present on a lot of the spoken word storytelling stuff, but it's obviously just not doing Slint. It's their own thing, clearly. Yeah, it's very, I love how delightfully dark this record is. It feels like this embrace of the darkness and the sleaziness it's presenting, particularly on songs like Key Babylon, The Turning of Our Bones, Another Clockwork Day, where you're experiencing almost this tragic patheticness through the eyes of someone who, through like the eyes of the characters in the songs. I really do love the instrumentals on here. It's a really nice blend of electronic and more natural sounding stuff. It gives a really great groove to a lot of these songs. Like Tyler said, they're almost like disco tracks half of the time, especially songs like the Rager, Here Comes Comus. I will say, I think Fable of the Urban Fox, kind of in contrast to a lot of other people, I feel it comes off a bit heavy-handed. A bit of that is the point for sure, but I thought it did stand out as a notable outlier as one I didn't quite get along with as much as everything else here. But the dark depressiveness of this record, and I feel rather than choosing to rebel against that darkness, choosing to embrace it is what makes this so interesting for me. I love the sheer number of strain influences across here, like the trap beat on the one song, but that it speaks to me as this very interesting, like exciting, fun in a sense that I get so much glee out of how morbid, sinister this record can be, how it revels in that. And yeah, I guess I'll wrap it up there. I liked it a lot, and I feel the Twilight Sad comparison is very interesting because in a way this almost scratches every itch for me that band doesn't. And that's about what I have to say. Yeah.
Well, I know like part of your criticism with that band is their style of writing, and that's sort of very different here. It's less illusory and more detailed, I suppose.
Well, I think the difference, what's interesting is that previous Arab Strap records are very heavily autobiographical, almost entirely, I think. Whereas this record, being a comeback record, was a distinct decision to write less autobiographically and to write more about characters and ideas and have kind of more diverse subject matter. And so there's definitely some autobiographical songs on here, like Another Clockwork Day, for instance. But you do get more of a wider sort of reach in terms of the writing and storytelling. I think maybe that's part of the appeal of this specifically, whereas a band like the Twilight Sad, very much insular writing that's very much about personal crises in a very incredibly direct way, whereas Aiden's a more elliptical writer, and maybe that has more appeal just for certain people.
Perhaps, yeah.
Anyway, okay, let's move into our favorite tracks and ratings then. Jake, do you want to go first?
Sure. My three favorite tracks are The Turning of Our Bones, Another Clockwork Day, and Sleeper. Least favorite track, it's either Kababylon or I Was Once a Weak Man, but I'll say Kababylon, and I give it a light 7.
My three favorite tracks are The Turning of Our Bones, Here Comes Comus, and Another Clockwork Day. My least favorite, probably Fable of the Urban Fox. I would give this an 8 out of 10.
Sick.
My three favorites are Turning of Our Bones, Sleeper, and Here Comes Comus. Least favorites, I Was Once a Weak Man, and I will also give it an 8.
Oh, that's me. Right. My three favorite tracks are Turning of Our Bones, let's say Sleeper, and Another Clockwork Day. My least favorite, I don't know. Bluebird, I guess. I just don't remember anything about it. I'm also going to give it a 7.
Okay, well, actually, Bluebird's one of my 3 favorites, so I'll shout that out just to be contrast. But my 2 favorite songs in the album are Sleeper and Turning Bare Bones. Least favorite track, if I had to pick one, would be Tears on Tour, and I give the album an 8.5.
Neat. This is a bottoming out. It is 7.7, such as Violent Femmes, Lament, Arc, Ultimate Success Today.
Fell from the Tree as well, I see.
Yeah, it's true, yes.
So yeah, in good company. All right. So our second review today is back in, I think, November, we discussed King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizards KG, which was, I think, presented as the first half of a double record with a second half to follow in 2021. And so, I thought that the KG was not one of their best records for sure, but it did showcase some interesting sort of experimentation on it. They were trying to do some new things with it. I haven't listened to it since then, but I distinctly remember that there was a disco song on it that I really dug. And so I was curious to see how this would pan out with the second half. And so here we have LW. And I don't really have notes on this record, so to speak. I listened to it for a few times. I think it's a bit underwhelming. And I feel like that's probably going to be relatively a consensus opinion, although if people disagree and think that it's better than KG, then I'd love to hear about that. But what's the general feeling on how LW shapes up to KG? Because this is a unique circumstance for us to be reviewing half of an album months after we review the first half because of the way that it was released. So what are our feelings about how it compares to the first half? Does it feel like it's actually of a piece with it, or does it feel like how does it feel to you guys?
I'm not surprised that this sort of can be taken as a back half of a record, because in many ways with a lot of records, the back half, some of the songs take maybe more of a quiet tone on occasion, or there's some more sort of sonic diversity, whereas the first one was more stacked with more aggressive songs, although the closer really stands out away from that, I suppose, because that, is 8 minutes and it gets quite hard and quite heavy at points. I would almost say it's a shade longer than I would like it to. It can get kind of repetitive at points, and if it was like a tighter 6 minutes, it might be better.
And what I think is interesting about it, though, is that song does feel like I mean, in my opinion, it feels like a strangely long-winded closer for a record. So if you consider LW just as a record in its own right, it seems like a strangely long-winded record for something so tight and unassuming. But if you consider it to be the closer of KGLW, this 80-minute double album, it feels appropriately huge for that context. And I'm not just theorizing either that this is a second half of a W record. They've explicitly said that it is, and this was a decision to release the record in two halves like this. But and I went back and checked, and I found that the last track on KG flows seamlessly into the first track on this record, which is very King Gizzard, a sort of thing that they love to do in terms of making their whole albums feel like cyclical, going back to Non and Gone Infinity. But yeah, I do feel like my opinion of this record, my opinion of this set of songs does actually change depending on whether I'm considering this unit of its in and of itself versus whether I consider it the second half of a double album. In either case, I still think it's underwhelming, and I think that this is a set of songs that are noticeably weaker than the set of songs on KG. In many ways, it feels like a B-sides record in some extent. To some extent, this is, I believe, also an exercise. I mean, KGLW as a whole project is an exercise in microtonal playing. Not obviously not the first exercise in microtonal playing that King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard have done, but as was the case with most of the songs on KG, I believe, there's a lot of microtonal playing on this record too. But you know, cool extra notes a good album does not make. The songs here are sometimes feel weirdly malformed, repetitive, uninspired. The opening track, I think, is it's strangely irritating. I just couldn't really get into it. I do think there are some highlights. We've already alluded to the closing track, which I think has lots of these kind of doomy, heavy riffs that definitely call back to some of the more aggressive projects. And I think it gives the closer of this double album an appropriate sense of grandeur. That said, I also kind of have to agree with Saoirse that I think it kind of does, even as the closer to this double album context, it does feel a little bit stale by the time you get to the end of it. Like it just kind of plods a bit. And the KGLW, KGLW. This record has a few multiple tracks where they're kind of just repeating this title refrain. Anorexia is another one where it's like just over and over and over and over, and it feels like it feels like what it is, which is they wanted to come back after one of their lead instrumentalists left the band. They wanted to come back with a big sweeping 80-minute double album, and in trying to create that, the padding that was necessary for them to get it to this length has really become apparent, and a lot of this back half feels like padding.
It's just, for me, like it is so obvious to me with this record that a lot of the thought stopped at coming up with the idea for the record, of doing it like this with the microtonal things, and they not much thought then went into pacing, structure, songwriting.
Yeah, what it actually reminds me of is the last Foals record, which was released in the same way. They had a double album, 80 minutes of music, and they released it in two halves, months apart. And that had the exact same problem. I still think as a holistic project, that's better than this, but it had the same problem where the second half of it had some of the weakest material, I should say, because it did end up feeling like they had to pad the project out to get it to this 80-minute thing that they wanted it to be. And they ended up putting most of the padding in the second half because they wanted to get people excited about the project with the first half. And that record also ends with one of its best songs at the very end being this blown out, lengthy, riff-heavy closer. And so it almost feels like King Gizzard listened to that Foals project and thought, well, that's a pretty cool idea. That's a way of getting our creative juices rejuvenated. And this is the thing about King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is I have always struggled to get into this band relative to other people. People have been talking at me for years about how King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard are amazing. And I listened to Nonagon Infinity shortly after it came out. I thought it was fine. I've never loved that album, to be perfectly honest, although I think it has some great songs on it. To me, the best thing they've done is I'm in Your Mind Fuzz, which I enjoyed catching up with last year, and I thought was the only thing I've heard to date that doesn't really drag at any point. But anyway, I've always kind of felt a weird distance from them, and that's been compounded by the fact that they have released, if you count this as a separate album, this is their 17th record in 10 years, I believe. So they're just a band that are relentlessly prolific in a way that I think can be alienating, and I expect tiresome when it comes to the fact that we're going to keep doing this podcast and there's probably going to keep being new King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard albums, and I just fail to get invested in the band's story. They occasionally have moments of brilliance. I think that they have never nailed the microtone, the influence, the integration of microtonal tuning into great songwriting better than they did on Rattlesnake, which was the very first song on Flying Microtonal Banana, and still one of their best songs, I think. But it does feel like spinning wheels at this point. I'm not sure. I get like wanting to do an 80-minute album to, rejuvenate your creative juices, but I don't understand why you would reintroduce the microtonal gimmick in a way that is not really doing anything new with it. I mean, again, some songs did interesting genre experiments on the KG half, but they seem to like not be interested in experimenting at all on this half of the record, and it's a real shame. I do like some songs though. I think that One ONE is pretty good. Really dug the riffs on that song, and I think Supreme Ascendancy and Static Electricity back to back are solid tracks as well. And then you get East West Link, which just basically is like an extended coda to Static Electricity, and is maybe the most galling example of like lack of inspiration and wheel spinning on this whole project. So yeah.
So any of y'all seen the Society bottom text memes? Now this KGLW is that meme. It's just KG is the Society part and this is the bottom text part. It's fucking filler. Who cares? Move on.
Yeah. I gave the KG the highest rating of all five of us when we reviewed it. I gave it 8, and
How embarrassing.
No, I stand by it. I still think that as I didn't realize it was the first half. I didn't realize it was the first half of a double album when we reviewed it, and I just thought it was a set of 10 songs. And I still think that as a set of 10 songs, it's pretty fucking solid.
No,
I think it's better I think it's better than anything else they've done except for that I've heard, except for I'm in Your Mind Fuzz. So I'll own that. I'll own that hot take.
Okay, fair enough.
This is fucking leftovers. It's lukewarm. It's a fucking microwave meal.
Like, I feel like this album can be perfectly summed up in a tweet friend of the podcast Laura made when she said, King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard do anything other than middling stoner rock when you go microtonal challenge, and it's just that is what has happened.
Yeah,
I am just literally confused. I don't know why they are doubling down on this particular facet of their sound when it is like it's not like Flying Microtonal Banana was like that much more successful than anything else they'd made. So I really don't know what inclined them to just double down and do that again. And then they did it again. And when you look at it as a double album, it doesn't fucking work because it's front loaded with all of the good songs. And then the back half is noticeably not as good. And then you take each album on their own by their own merits, and you have one album which is pretty good and another one that gives you literally no reason to re-listen to it ever again. The flow is not improved. The sequencing isn't made better. The songs are not propped up by each other based on where they are. It's just like, guys, you've made your name off of being this eclectic band that does all this shit. And now all of a sudden you make your self-titled double album the least interesting thing that you've ever done. And it's just like, I feel like you are turning into a band that I'm not going to care about anymore. And seeing as you made Nonagon Infinity and Infest the Rat's Nest and 12 Bar Brews and Polygonal Wannaland, all albums I love. Why? It's fine. The songs are.
I was just gonna say that I feel like King Gizzard are like turning into the Ubisoft of modern music. They're just shitting out 3 products a year, and they're all the same in different forms. And it's like, guys, just like go away for like 4
there was a
years
novelty
or
in it
something.
before too. Like there was the fact that they dropped all those albums in that one year, and the real draw of them was that they were nothing alike. And I'm not saying that they have to hearing to this or that they shouldn't pick a sound to stick with. It's just that I don't think that they are particularly great at this, and they've already gotten their mileage out of it. So it's just exhausting. This entire album just feels so, I mean, repetitive was thrown around a lot, and that's basically the entire bit. It's like, it's repetitive even if it was good, and it's mediocre, which then, like, even then that holds it back. And I'm just like, I don't care. I don't care about this. Who gives a shit?
They've just painted themselves into a corner a bit. And honestly, I can only imagine that they reintroduced the microtonal thing because they realized they were a bit stale for ideas and thought, well, if we can make up more, if we can make up new notes, then at least we can have some variation.
Take a break, my guys. You've earned it. Then come back when you have an idea. You don't have to keep doing this. You're fine.
Well, again, I thought that KG was good. I thought it would have been fine.
I did too.
And this is just, leftovers.
Well, that said, I'm never going to listen to KG again because it just exists in a better form elsewhere. And it's just like...
Yeah.
By the same band, nonetheless.
Yes!
Reasonable.
I mean, I think I'll certainly throw on a good handful of songs from this record again. But it's the filler that drags it down, really, and there's a lot of it.
Yeah, and it's the age-old thing of like you could pick the best shit from both of these records and make something even better than either of them are on their own.
Yeah,
correct.
I probably yes. Favorite tracks and ratings? Should we move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
I'll go backwards. I'll go first. My three favorite tracks are ONE, Supreme Ascendancy, and KGLW. Least favorite track is East West Link, and this album gets 5.5.
I feel like I've been quite negative on the record, but I want to emphasize there's a solid like half of this record that I could listen to at any time and quite enjoy. My favorite tracks are probably let's say the opening three. I'll go with that. If I had to choose least favorite track, God, I don't know. One of the ones I've forgotten completely, which is a few. I'm gonna give this record a 6.5. I'm gonna do that.
What do I feel? What do I say? Fuck you! It all goes away. 5.
Oh, beautiful.
Three favorite tracks: KGLW, Supreme Ascendancy, and ONE. Least favorite track, Ataraxia, 5.
Okay.
That's a 5.5.
Ataraxia is a really phenomenal Team Sleep song. So
yes, it
listen
is.
to that.
Terrible Fate franchise thing.
The only other albums to get 5.5 are both Eminem records.
Ooh.
By Slim Shady and Marshall Mathers.
That's rough.
That's rough, buddy.
Christ. Well, the front bottom's got a 5.6. So
better album.
As did the Beths. So
also better.
Two albums I've no memory of whatsoever.
I will never listen to them ever again in my life.
I will listen to this. I will happily listen to those bands again, but not those albums. And that is true of King Gizzard.
Are we going to talk about real music now?
Yes.
Well, that's a matter of opinion. I'm just kidding. We are going to talk.
I've seen August rate real music.
What?
For this album.
We are going to talk about real music now. I was just baiting.
Yeah,
next up on the slab is.
This is the 6th album from Philadelphia indie emo group Tiger's Jaw. The second after a big old lineup change where two of the band members moved into more prominent songwriting roles to fill in those of members that had left. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear, you might as well get into how you feel about the record and how you think it compares to their other records and where it sits in their discography.
So the only other ones I've heard are the self-titled and Spin. And And I think this is another excellent record from them. It hardly reinvents the wheel of emo, but like fucking yeah, who cares? It's consistently really strong songwriting, and they're sort of exploring a lot of interesting new places and within their sound. There's almost like something like Commit kind of reminds me of like ska in some ways, but without ska instrumentation.
I think it's fair to say that they've drifted a little bit from their emo roots, but you can kind of hear some of that bleed through at points on this record.
Yeah, that's true. This is definitely more of an indie record than an emo record, signified by Andy Hull's contributions to the title track, which is excellent. Good stuff there. I find this to be a very consistent record, in that it is consistently really good, but never like fully, completely as excellent as it could be. And it's one of those that's kind of hard to talk about for me, just because it's like something is missing and I can't point to what exactly. It could be that they were still reeling a bit from the lineup change, but I feel like Spin is a much more consistent record than this. Well, not a much more consistent, but a much more holistic record than this. It feels more full and thought out. But anyway, this is just a really solid set of indie rock songs by a band who I just enjoy a lot.
I also think this record is good and quite consistent. However, I must say that Morgan's comment of like something feels missing is sort of my thesis for it. It definitely drags it down, I think, a little bit more for me, just because, I don't know, you listen to enough of this music and you just know what really works for you and you know what really doesn't. And it's not that this doesn't, it's just that at 34 minutes, it's a little bit slight, and I can't help but use a podcast no word here, but feels a bit transitional, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering Morgan commented that this wasn't the album that immediately proceeded after a lineup change. They did another album before this. So maybe it's just that very sort of experimentation of like trying to expand their sound, which I haven't heard any of their other records, but I plan on checking them out just to see if I like them more. But maybe these little things, I guess to me, maybe come across as half measures, because it's a 34-minute album, and I just kind of feel like it all blends together in a weird way, because it doesn't all sound the same. It's just that it kind of, and I don't even want to say that it doesn't sound like anything, because that makes it sound way more negative than my actual opinion is, but it's like, there's just not a lot tangible about this sound that I really like or identify with. I think it's at its best on the opening track, the title track, which is pretty distinct in the track list, as it's a much slower song. It's a much more intimate song than I think most of the other tracks are, and it leads me to enjoying it the most. It's basically the only one I truly remember other than Commit, I think. But yeah, it's a bit slight. I feel like something is definitely missing here, but it's well written all across the board. I can't really get into it instrumentally, but I can get into it lyrically and thematically. It's good shit. It'll appeal to you, but at the same time, I've been listening to the Menzingers for the like entire duration of the last 3 years of my life. So when I listen to something that is orbiting that, my standards are quite high, and this, that's not totally fair to everybody, but at the same time,
yeah.
I recommend that you check out Spin. I think you'd like that a lot more considering
You talked about that, I think, like the week before last, and that was the one that I think I added first to my library because I was just like, this sounds like something I would dig. So I'm definitely still going to.
Well, I would say, because I went back and listened to both the self-titled and Spin, and I would say that the self-titled record is the best record from them that I've heard, and certainly the most immediate. It has some incredible emo hook songs on it, very different sound to this. But I actually like this album more than Spin, believe it or not, although I don't think there's much between them. I just think this has a little bit more consistency, but still I am in a weird sort of in-between place with this record, much like Jake. I also agree that the best song is absolutely the opening title track, which I find immediately captivating with its acoustic intro and longing vocal melody. There's no control from the back seat of your life, so drive and don't ask why is a great lyric, probably the best lyric on the album. And I also love the way the song builds and erupts midway through. It feels earned and huge and cathartic. I do find, though, the songs that are led by the female vocalist to be considerably less compelling. Unfortunately, I think that her voice is sleep-inducing. And really, I think the album sinks into a middle ground of sort of just being fine, perfectly serviceable, emo-influenced indie rock pretty quickly. There are certainly some more decent highlights in the first half of the record. I'd shout out Hesitation, New Detroit, Can't Wait Forever, and in particular the woozy dream pop of Lemon Mouth as strong points. I think they make for a really good consecutive run of songs that aren't necessarily going to wow general listeners, but I think are definitely memorable enough. The second half of this album, though, I mean, I've listened to this thing twice and I can't remember most of the songs after that. I do think Anniversary is a decent closer, though. So yeah, I think this is a record that definitely will have a particular audience of people who are super into that blissed out, hooky sort of indie rock. It just doesn't quite have enough idiosyncrasy and character to really land me. But I do think that they're a decent band. I think that the self-titled record is still really great, like great album. And I will still keep my eyes out for future releases, but this one didn't really do it for me.
Well, when you say that the audience for this album will be people into that kind of blissed out sort of indie pop, indie rock, that's me. You're talking about me, and I did rather enjoy this record quite a bit. Again, everyone's talked about the opener. It is a really, really great song, and when it explodes, it's incredibly satisfying, as we've all said. I do want to highlight New Detroit. It's a very sort of like, it's like a sort of type of breezy type thing. I enjoyed it a lot. The writing across the board is really strong. This is why I was surprised to learn that the writing members changed when two members left, because the writing is so strong on this record. With it's like the chorus on Body Language especially really got me. You're a part of me that I can't live without. How I used to memorize your movements and now I can't pick you out of a crowd. That's, I had that romantic experience in my life, and it's described with a sort of an understated truth, in my opinion. But across the board, it's just sort of very pleasant indie rock with some more edgier tracks. I do kind of want to hear what they have next, because this is evidently sort of a direction they're finding their feet in, I suppose, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where they land. I really enjoyed it. I think it's very well written, very well played. Could have done with a bit more sort of kick, a bit more bite. Like when like Bright Eyes are moving out of that folky, emo-y thing into sort of Americana, there is an album where they hit their stride with it, and it's probably my favorite Bright Eyes record. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the equivalent in this trajectory.
Right. Well, I'll get
August,
this
just
over
before
with.
you start, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm
No
sorry
problem.
I made you listen to this. Is all I have to say about that.
It's not too bad, but I'm not gonna bury the lead. Didn't care for this too much. I thought it was okay. Most notable part about it for me was the fact that it had a male and female singer. Yeah, I can't really pin much about it down. It was just a little unremarkable. Certainly not my thing. I'm not gonna really belabor the point there. Some good choruses. It was fine.
Yeah, I think really the sole appeal of this album to any one of us who has to really dig into this in a critical fashion is like that it's just pure comfort food of music of this variety.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot to like sort of dig deep on. So like I've listened to this like 10 times in total now because I just turn it on and do whatever. So it just really fills that sort of role very nicely. But like digging into it in a critical fashion is challenging.
I'll tell you what, Morgan, this did remind me of a record that I think sounds quite similar that I really like, that I'll shout out because about, I think, 30 people in the whole world have heard it. And it's a record by an artist called Pronoun, and it's an album titled I'll Show You Stronger. And it's really good, and it's very similar sound to this, and great hooks, great sort of presence, less emo influenced and more into the sort of indie rock thing. But I think if you like this record, you'll enjoy that one too.
Yeah.
But yeah, solid. All right, Jake, favorite tracks and ratings.
3 favorite tracks are I Won't Care How You Remember Me, New Detroit, and Commit. Least favorite track, probably Lemon Mouth and 6.
Righty.
Yeah. I don't know. Chinese Satellite, 5 out of 10. See ya. I gotta get food now.
Okay.
Axel Rose has left the chat.
My 3 favorite tracks are Hesitation, the title track, and Commit. Least favorite. I don't really have a least favorite. Yeah, I'll say 8.5 out of 10.
Neato. My favorite tracks are I Won't Care How You Remember Me, New Detroit, Body Language. If I had to choose least favorite, I don't know, maybe Never Wanted To or Heaven Apart, just that sort of ending stretch. And I'm going to get the record. And let's give it a 7.5. I think that's fair.
That was fucking torturous.
Well, yeah, I will kindly request that you never make that noise again.
It sounded like a small animal being hurt, and I was just like, oh no.
Well, I can tell you now, it was completely involuntary. So,
my 2 favorite tracks are the title track, I Won't Care How You Remember Me. Can't Wait Forever, and the woozy dream pop of Lemon Mouth. And my least favorite track, if I had to pick one, would be I can't remember what it's called, but the second song on the album I thought was kind of bland.
Cat's Cradle.
Cat's Cradle?
Yeah, but it was pretty short, I think. So, not the end of the world. And yeah, I give this puppy a... What did I rate this album? I'll give it a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, now be nice to the puppy.
Right, so that's a 6.6 on average, which we don't have a 6.6, but
Whoa.
6.5s are American Head, Atlas Vending. 6.7s are Fleet Foxes Shore or a Marling Short Movie.
Sick.
All right.
Yeah, okay. So we move on to our last new release for the day. second I, spoiler alert, fell in love with it, I realized that trying to get a discussion out of this would be, I think, really, it might not be successful, but it will at the very least be interesting. And we don't talk too much about extreme metal on this podcast, despite the fact that most of us, if not all of us, are really into extreme metal in one form or another. And this is really a deep end record.
I think the problem with reviewing extreme metal is because it's like we could make this channel in the same form that we do, but just with modern contemporary extreme metal releases. Like,
yes,
it's just like a world unto itself.
Yeah.
So like picking individual acts to cover in that capacity is challenging.
But I think you're right. It is a complete world into itself. I sometimes dip into websites that review metal, and I'm overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of stuff that's coming out all the time that lots of people apparently love. But I think what's interesting about this record is that it seems to have kind of broken through a little bit. It's one of the highest rated albums of the year on Rate Your Music. It's critically and commercially adored so far. And I think what's interesting about that is that it is such an unfriendly and such a dissonant and such a technical record. It is not something that holds your hand through it. It is something that is relentlessly pummeling. It is oppressive. It is genuinely bone-chilling to listen to. And I did struggle to write about this, but I did manage to get some thoughts down while I was listening to it last night. It is kind of difficult to describe a record like this, like really unpack what it's doing if you don't have like a musical background. Because most of the reviews I've read that I felt were really insightful about this record were talking about aspects of like the musicality of it and the theory and stuff. And I don't really have that knowledge. I have some basic knowledge, but not very much. But I think everyone, regardless, can appreciate that this is not your bog standard death metal, or even technical death metal in the same way that a band like Gorguts is, for instance. At least the Gorguts that I've heard. It's definitely kind of cut from the same cloth. But this is just actively unfriendly and willfully difficult in such a confronting and jarring way that I can't say I was expecting. And I'm kind of at a loss to describe the appeal and specifically why I think it's so technically impressive. In some respects, I was reminded of the Imperial Triumphant album from last year that Jake and Saoirse sang the praises of in their year-end albums countdown. That was an undeniably talented band and a really thrilling album, but it didn't quite click for me in the way that this did so instantly. And I think what it is with this record is that there's a real sense of doom and horror to it that feels so thoroughly embedded in everything the band are doing musically that I find it so much more entrancing, hypnotic, and transfixing than I would ever expect from a record that's categorized as avant-garde death metal. Aspects of the production remind me of the Haxon Cloak, and even Sun to a certain extent. And also I would say, it's a bit more of a reach, but it has to me the same kind of absurd menace as like a late era Scott Walker album. It feels as though the band are reaching into a bag of sonic tricks to create an atmosphere that's frightening and just truly demented. They want to drag you through the ringer of horrific glory without leaning on any sort of musical convention or template. There are very few typical death metal signifiers here. In fact, very few extreme metal signifiers at all outside of the vocal tone and the guitar tone, vocal style and the guitar tone. And even those are treated in an unconventional way in the mix of this record. One thing I noted is the vocals are mixed quite low in this record, which initially irked me for the first few minutes of my first listen. But once I adjusted to the atmosphere, I started to appreciate this decision. The fact the vocals sound a little distant, only makes them feel more eerie and threatening. Like you're not quite sure exactly where they're coming from, where in the world that this album is trying to create that they might come at you and attack you from. There are moments throughout this record that I find absolutely stunning and memorable. There's a section about 4 minutes into the second track, Inexorably Ousted Senti, where the band have this dissonant ringing motif in an odd time signature, and they kind of latch onto it. And then they just pull the floor out from under you, and these howling, monstrous guitars layer on top of it. And they do that same melodic motif, but they make it sound 10 times larger. It's really fucking scary shit. Coincidentia Oppositorum is a 12-minute juggernaut of relentless, barreling violence. And one thing I really love about good technical death metal shit is actually, funnily enough, the same thing that I love about late period Autechre, which is the way that they move from one melodic fragment of an idea to the next at such a dizzying speed, but they underpin it with such aggressively engaging rhythms that it all just holds together. You have this thing that's constantly moving and changing, but it also has this regular and structured core at the heart of it that you can cling to as all the different sounds and textures on top of that are assaulting you. The title track finds an incredible groove and rides it. It's almost like they're using the groove to burrow through the surface of Earth into hell itself. I like how jarring it is because of how accessible this groove is compared to other sounds on the record. But then, of course, they complicate that by adding all these dissonant textures around it. And then the song eventually kind of just disintegrates towards the end into this pool of what I can only describe as shattered glass guitar tones. And these are just moments on the record that stood out to me on subsequent listens. There's so much happening on this album that I still haven't fully unpacked all of it. But I do find it consistently super exciting, and I find these new kind of rhythmic and melodic discoveries inside it. I just love technical death metal that is like so heavily leaning on dissonant sounds, and the way that you get these really scary and horrendous melodies, like melodies that would normally sound standard, normal, but they're played in a really dissonant way or even a detuned way, and that makes them feel so much more strange and off kilter. And there's heaps of that on this album. Yeah, I know it's a difficult kind of record to describe, but I'm curious to hear what your guys' experience was listening to this, and whether it had an appeal to you, whether it held you at a distance, and what you think of the sound that these guys have.
Okay, I'll leap on that. I won't bury the lead. I have loved this record every time I've listened to it. I've had many different experiences with it. The first one was very having to take a step back and take it all in and take in everything going on that I could. And then the second one was letting it wash over me and variations on that therein. It actually really reminded me of my experience listening to Bitches Brew by Miles Davis at points, in the way that polyrhythms are used, for example, sort of different rhythms placed on top of each other. That's one of the ways. So not only do they create a sense of dissonance, but also a sense of propulsion amongst the noise. Also in the way that different instruments have different, being basically the same instrument is being played differently in each ear. And each line in each ear is dissonant by itself, and it only gets more dissonant when they're juxtaposed in that fashion. And it just creates this absolutely captivating but disorienting sense of chaos. It's like it's like going down on the Big Dipper. It's completely disorienting. That being said, there is a great level of tonal contrast in this record. For example, track 3 slowly builds from a more atmospheric start, and it builds and builds and builds and builds to something really captivating. And I love the guitar tones on that song as well. When they take the time to restrain themselves, they let the sort of texture of their instruments really take the floor. Specifically on this song, you get this really sort of crunchy, sort of felt fuzzy steel wool type feeling to it. Track 4, the title track, is also a standout for me. From like an orchestral start, it just comes in and keeps pummeling and pummeling and pummeling until the end of the song. I feel like the best way to describe the appeal of the record is to both describe those technical aspects of what's going on and how they create the dissonance, and also just to say, if you just sit down and let it wash over you, it is a really extreme experience. I can't remember hearing a record that sounds much like it. It takes what it's doing to such an edge, and I have a lot of respect for it. And I have a lot of enjoyment of it, just sitting down and letting it wash over me. Not for everyone, it's worth saying right at the beginning. If you are with the world at all, maybe dip your toe in the water. Don't jump straight in at the deep end. But if you feel like this is something you might enjoy, you'll probably enjoy it. You know,
yeah, it's like
it's just doing so much right.
It's like how if you've never heard a jazz record, you would not recommend that person listen to John Coltrane's Ascension.
Yeah, exactly, right.
You would say listen, and it's the same with this. If you consider this an extension of death metal, you would say start with the classics. And I think that to a certain extent, me already being in a headspace where I was listening to lots of death metal and then just happening to stumble across this, it was like this golden moment where it was like, oh wow, it's like death metal can do, and I hate to bring this comparison up again, but death metal can do like a guitar and metal equivalent of what Autechre do in their 2010s material, where it's like just so shifting and so layered and so dissonant, but it's like beautifully composed and shows a clear kind of understanding of the basic tenets of constructing music. It's not just like making all these sounds for the sake of it. It's combining them in a way that's interesting.
Yeah, like the techniques they're using to create this sort of cacophony, they're not like avant-garde ideas, but they're using them in a really purposeful way, and they know exactly what they're doing and how to do it. And I applaud them for that.
Does anyone else have any thoughts, feelings on their experience with this beast of a record?
I think it's definitely interesting that Saoirse says it's just like Saoirse says something that I wholeheartedly agree with, that this is like, if this is the kind of thing that does interest you in the slightest, or that you like anything of its kind, fucking go hard on this shit, because you'll probably love it. Which makes me, I suppose, the great anomaly here. I think this album's very good, but I also think that I've listened to a lot of music like this, and I know what I do and do not like in it. And I don't know. I think that what really holds me at arm's length with this is that I just like, Tyler actually made a comparison that I was going to make, which is apt, and that's the Imperial Triumphant record from last year, is that that's an album that is just so dizzyingly chaotic and assaultive that I just kind of bowed to its very whim of how adventurous it was, and how like unwieldy it seems to be, and how many different sounds it combined. And for being an avant metal release like this, I don't find any of the avant tendencies to be particularly interesting.
Turn.
It's a lot of polyrhythmic stuff. It's a lot of just sort of whiplash inducing movements that just sort of go and hit and go. And I think too, it's a combination of the fact that like, I find the production, the vocals are definitely mixed a bit too low for my liking, but I just find the production here a bit too dry for my liking. I want this to sound fuller, and I don't really know what I even mean by that. It's just that the sound here sounds like it's, I don't know, you can take a lot of things with this area of like black metal adjacent stuff and you can make the lower fi stuff work. And not that this is lo-fi, it's not. It's just that I just don't particularly care for the way this sort of serrated kind of angular sound happens. And for as long of a record as it is, it just really wears thin quickly. Like I remember being pretty enamored with the, I don't know if it was the last Deathspell Omega record. No, it was the one before last, I think, called Paracletus, which is basically my ideal version of this album, which is this really robust, full sounding thing that's like its avant tendencies are a bit more geared towards, I guess, the progressive crowd. Which I guess I decidedly fall under, but it also similarly kind of beats you in the same way that the Imperial Triumphant album did. And that one is just such a fascinating listen just because of how it combines things like jazz. And I don't know, there's like, this is there's a very core feel to this that feels like it almost goes against the avantness. And I don't, it makes it difficult to latch onto, and it makes it large stretches of it for me feel very indistinct from one another. I like the moments where it sort of builds its wackier instrumental ideals a lot more, like the end 3 or so minutes of the first track, where it's sort of these ascending strings that sort of build this track up of being like this pretty typical avant metal song, and then it just sort of like builds and rises, and it's really fucking like menacing and doomy and awesome. And then there are just sort of moments like on the title track where I'm like, I don't know, man, that there's just the focuses of this are just not to my sensibilities. And that's not, I guess, the record's fault at all, but like, when you have an experience like this where the goal from the outset is just to beat the shit out of you, I need something that, like, the variety of this album to me serves to make it less interesting. And I don't know, I know that I'm probably speaking Japanese to like literally everybody here, but everything that this album like does and is feels sort of half measury to me. I wanted it to commit a bit more. Its risks are come across to me as not fully committed. And when you do something like this, I require that commitment to latch onto it. I think it's a good album. I think that it's obviously really well constructed. I think that a lot of its musical ideas are indeed quite robust, and that it is a satisfying experience, but it left me wanting a hell of a lot more considering its reception. It felt very standard for this genre, and as a result it just didn't really hit me with the intensity that I wanted it to.
Well, rest assured, Jake, because you were not even the only anomaly in this podcast.
Oh shit, I was not expecting that.
Yeah, you know what, I wasn't either.
Nani.
Okay, thank God.
Because this, I really struggled with this one. There's a lot. The biggest, there's a lot that I respect about this album.
Yeah,
its commitment to being so completely singular, and the things that it is exploring are on paper amazing to me. And I was really, really looking forward to covering another extreme metal album on this podcast. And it's just the big hurdle, I think. And clearly this is something that is quite divisive. I just cannot escape the feeling that whenever I'm listening to it, I just think, man, this is mixed like dog shit.
Okay, thank you.
I can't make anything out besides the drums. I know that guitars and the bass are playing, and I know that there are vocals. I can't differentiate them to such a degree that like I can't even tell what notes are being played. It sounds like a buzzsaw, and not in a particularly appealing way. When the record is like pure atmosphere, that is like leave this body type shit. Like it is capital D dope. But like when it is doing its extreme metal stuff, like I don't know, I require a certain amount of clarity to enjoy that. And when you're just not particularly clear, it doesn't, I don't know, I don't vibe. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff that these guys are doing. But I wish I could make it out. And I don't know, maybe I'm going deaf.
See, yeah, because it's so strange to me because I had the exact opposite reaction to the mixing, where I felt like even though it's noisy and chaotic, I felt to my ears it all sounded crisp, but that might just be me.
I think I love the mixing on this. I think it sounds very claustrophobic, and it took me a couple listens to adjust to the way that sounds set on this record.
I'm glad that you said that, Morgan, because you clearly have like a deeper instrumental knowledge than I do, and that made so much more sense hearing that from you than hearing it like from myself did, because I was just like really struggling to put into words why exactly this didn't work. And I think that actually Tyler hits something that it's like, it is a very claustrophobic mix, but for what it's doing, I either want it to be less claustrophobic so I can hear it more, or more claustrophobic so that it commits more to what it's doing. Like it occupies a weird middle ground that it just fucking washes right over me. I wanted it to either go harder or fucking relent a tiny bit.
Yeah, I just wish I could understand any of that when I listen to it. But look, you know,
boy, do you just know how we feel then.
Yeah.
I
guess we're in a similar headspace. All right, then. August remains the lone standout. And I have no idea where August will fall, considering everyone's opinions.
Yeah, so record, I think, opens with the song that defines the whole record, Sub Spiciae Aeternitatis, which it tells you everything you need to know. The riffage here is just insane, and the production is, obviously whacked out and claustrophobic. To me, what came to my mind when trying to describe the production, put it into words, was a whirlpool and processing the instruments through that, because that's essentially what most of this sounds like. And I think a lot of where this record will either make or break for you is the drums. And if you can get on board with how they sound, how they're processed, how they're mixed. And I think, and it took me a minute, but I did ultimately find myself embracing the drumming, enjoying it. I think they really add a crunch, a real counterpoint to some of the more drony electronic guitar and bass work on here. Structurally, it kind of functions all as, for me, this loud pounding metal instrumental. The lyrics are so far back in the mix that I feel you have to treat them as garnish to the main dish here.
Yeah, I totally just see the vocals as a texture. I have no idea what the lyrics are about.
I mean, I don't even know if I read them in full, really, because that's not what I come for with this record. And I think the aforementioned riffs do well as the record's kind of a driving force. I think there's a really nice there are some really nice dramatic time signature changes. I think the song that stood out to me in that regard was Coincidentia Oppositurum, which with its 12-minute runtime and its cool little time signature shifts. I feel what was really cool about that was there are some where I don't even quite notice they happen until they've resolved, and I thought that was an interesting quality. It makes it never a boring record when I'm like really in the moment and attending this record constantly. But sometimes I do think the mix becomes too cluttered in terms of the dedication to preserving the sound they're going for, which, as I read on their Bandcamp, was an attempt to capture something a lot different from how a lot of tech death sounds in terms of the ulcerates and death spell omegas of the genre. I read that was like directly their intent, and that's quite patently obvious here. And I feel that problem of sounding cluttered happened mostly towards the earlier parts of the record. I think as it went on, it found itself. I think it got a bit better as the runtime progresses. And yeah, I think it's a record that starts off pretty good, ends pretty great. I'm excited for the prospect of what they do next, although I think ultimately I would like to see something a bit more fully formed, a bit more diversified than what we've got here, but I think it's still an interesting record for sure.
Fair enough. Okay, well then, shall we move to our favorite tracks and ratings? I'll go first this time. My favorite tracks are the opening track, the 12-minute track.
Eternitatis.
Yes, that sounds about right. The opening track, the 12-minute track, and the title track. I don't have a least favorite track. I don't think anything in particular here stands out as particularly weak. And I give this album a 9 out of 10.
Nice. My favorite tracks were Inexorably Ousted Sente, Coincidentia Oppositorum. There we go. And I'm going to say title track. If I had least favorite, I know I might go for the opener, but I'm not committing to that. And I'm giving the record an 8.5 out of 10.
I just realized that I missed my opportunity to make a Monty Python joke and say my least favorite track is Incontinentia Buttocks.
Nice.
Anyway,
Yeah. My favorite tracks are Inexorably Ousted Sente, title track, Horror Vacui. Least favorites is the subspecies yeah, that one. 5.5 out of 10.
Right. My favorite tracks were Subspicie Aeternitatis, Coincidentia Oppositurum, and Imperative, Imperceptible Impulse. Least favorite was Inexorably Ousted Stente, and my rating, that's what I have to do, would be a 7 out of 10.
This is an Italian death metal band, so you gotta give it the gabagool, you know.
yeah. Coincidentia Oppositorum.
I take Latin in school, so I know how to. I know the pronunciation generally. It's useful rarely, but this is a case.
Another one pronunciation.
There's like my partner does Latin, and there's like Latin phrase books right behind me right now. So yeah, that's just, I don't know what the significance of that is.
Cool.
Anyway,
Jake.
Yeah, my three favorite tracks are Sub Specie Eternitatis, Horror Vacui, and Human Interface to Know God. Least favorite is Imperative Imperceptible Impulse, and I give it a 6.
least favorite track, Gabagool.
Gabagool.
Right, so
The thinly
that's a-
sliced garlic.
it's a 7.2 on average, which is
What do you mean, a
really-
7.2? Sorry. Shut
What the fuck was the end of that? 7.2.
What's the matter, you, huh?
may interest you to know that's the same score as Origin of the Alimonies and Dose Your Dreams and Reunions.
Sick.
By the way, that sounds about right. Considering I have the exact same opinion on two of those,
Yeah.
more or less.
Okay, so next week's main reviews are, we're going to have a decent chunk. I know we're still kind of nailing down the specific records we're going to review, but I'm pretty sure the two main records we're going to review are the new Lana Del Rey album, Chemtrails Over the Country Club, and a special review of a sort of Japanese shoegaze band, Korean shoegaze band, my bad. That was brought to our attention by both August and Saoirse, called Paranul, and their album To See the Next Part of the Dream. And that I can promise all our viewers at home, you are not going to want to miss that segment of next week's episode. And we're also going to review, I think to a certain extent, we might do minor reviews of the new Genesis Owusu album, and potentially an album from Jazz Emo Act, Really From, as well. So follow us on Twitter to stay updated on what we do end up reviewing. But before you go anywhere, we have a record club review for you coming up as well today of Carole King's classic record Tapestry. So go and check that out. Even if you haven't heard of the record and are not familiar with it, it's a very influential record that we're going to have hopefully an interesting discussion on. So go and check that out. Yes.
And on that note, rock over London, rock on Chicago, de coco. The secret of a good pasta is pasta.